Right, so hello everyone. Today we are doing some revision on the control of blood glucose. So as ever, we've got the links here for the Cognito videos as an additional bit of revision for you. First question, need to be able to define this from last lesson, is what is a hormone? There are 4 key points. So just give you a little bit of help. Here we can see the endocrine system. So we've got pituitary, hypothalamus, thyroid, the adrenal, the pancreas, the ovaries, and the testes, all of the endocrine glands that you need to do. And these 4 images represent the kind of 4 points that we'd be looking for with our hormone definition. So our first point would be that it's a chemical messenger. It's made of protein. The second is that it's produced by endocrine glands, and so we can see all the examples in this image here. And here we've got the pancreas, which we're going to be focusing on today. It is, of course, released into the blood and transported around the body in the blood, in the plasma, if we want to be specific. And it has a specific effect on a target organ, as we will be learning about and speaking about in a bit more detail with controlled blood glucose today. So, key points when we're thinking about blood glucose control is about the fact that the endocrine organ involved is the pancreas, and we've got 2 hormones that we're particularly interested in that are controlling blood glucose level there. So depending on the blood glucose level, one of those hormones is released, and they will either bring about an effect which increases blood glucose level or decreases blood glucose level, depending on whether blood glucose is too high or too low. So when blood glucose level is too high, the pancreas will release insulin, and what that does is it causes glucose to be absorbed from the blood, which is going to reduce the amount of glucose that there is in the blood. And in liver and muscle cells, they're going to convert that glucose into glycogen. And glycogen is a storage molecule, so it means that they're able to store energy for later on. Whereas a glucagon is released when blood glucose levels are too low. And what glucagon does is it causes glycogen to be turned back into glucose, and then that goes into the blood, which increases the blood glucose level. So, of course, we end up with blood glucose level returning back to normal. Now, that's all summarized within this kind of image. So when the blood glucose level is too high, we end up with which hormone? That would, of course, be insulin, which takes the glucose and it joins it together to make glycogen. Whereas when the blood glucose level is too low, that glycogen gets broken down by glucagon, or glucagon causes the breakdown of glycogen into glucose, which increases the blood glucose level. So summarized within this little simple representation down here. Now it's a smidgen more complicated in a flowchart wise, but this is a useful way of thinking about it. So we've got normal blood glucose level, which is about 90 milligrams per 100 milliliters of blood. And so if the blood glucose level increases, so you've just eaten a meal, you've eaten some sweets, you've had a donut, you've had a cake, whatever that may be, then your pancreas will detect that increase in the blood glucose level. Now, pancreas knows that this is too high, so it wants to return it back to normal. So what it's going to do is it is going to release insulin. Now, insulin is going to have 2 effects. The first one is it's going to cause cells to absorb glucose, which is just going to reduce the blood glucose level straight away. And the other thing that it does is it causes glucose to be taken up and turned into glycogen in the liver, but also in muscle cells as well. And what that does is it reduces the blood glucose level. So blood glucose level will return back to normal, which means that the pancreas detects that it's normal, and so it switches off the insulin production. So we've got that negative feedback loop that we looked at last time. Contrary to this, if the blood glucose level drops below normal, maybe you've been for a run, maybe you've not eaten in a while and you're a bit hungry, then again the pancreas will detect this, and that leads the pancreas to release the hormone glucagon. So we've got to be careful with the spelling of this, into the blood, and it's going to travel to the liver and the muscle cells, where it causes the glycogen to be broken down into glucose and to be released, and so blood glucose levels increase back up to normal, which is detected by the pancreas, so it stops producing the glucagon. And again, example of negative feedback about where that control brings it back to normal and then gets switched off, that kind of homeostasis type idea. Right, so multiple choice question here. Which of these 4 statements is correct? So we know it's not this first one because glucagon increases blood glucose and insulin decreases blood glucose. We know it's not this one because glycogen is how the glucose is stored, so that's not correct. Again, we've got glycogen being mentioned here, so that's also incorrect. So that leaves us with D. The blood glucose is increased by glucagon because that causes the glycogen to be broken down into glucose and released into the blood, and insulin causes the glucose to be taken up and converted to glycogen. All right, another set of 4 statements. So, release of insulin means liver converts glucose to glucagon. Well, glucagon is the hormone, so that's not correct. The release of insulin causes the liver to convert glucose to glycogen. So, insulin certainly causes this kind of route. So that one looks pretty good. The release of glycogen, so, well, it can't be this one because glycogen is how it's stored, so we know that one's not right. The release of glucagon causes liver to convert glucose into glycogen. Well, that one's not correct because it's the other way round. So that, of course, means that B was the correct statement. Insulin causes glucose to be taken up and turned into glycogen. Right, work your way through these statements. So glucose is the proper name for one type of sugar. We need glucose in our blood so that it can be used by cells for respiration. The level of glucose in your blood raises when you eat, digest and absorb foods containing carbohydrate. The level of glucose in your blood is lowered when you exercise. This is because when you exercise, your cells carry out more respiration. The level of glucose in your blood is detected by the pancreas. When your blood glucose level is high, the pancreas releases the hormone insulin. Insulin makes your liver and muscles take up the glucose and store it as glycogen. Insulin also causes the glucose to move into other body cells. When blood glucose levels are low, the pancreas releases the hormone glucagon. Glucagon makes your liver break down glycogen into glucose. When glycogen has been broken down into glucose, it is released into the blood. The name of the disease for someone to control their blood glucose level is, of course, diabetes. So, see if you can define these terms. So glucose is, of course, a sugar used in respiration to release energy. Glycogen is a storage molecule. It's made up of glucose joined together and it's stored in the liver and muscle cells. Insulin is a hormone produced by the pancreas, and what it does is it causes glucose to be turned into glycogen. And glucagon is another hormone produced by the pancreas, but this one causes your liver to break glycogen into glucose, and so raise your blood glucose level. So thinking about those disorders with blood glucose control, first off, we've got type 1 diabetes. Here, the point is that the pancreas doesn't produce enough insulin for you. So you can't control your blood glucose levels. They go up and down throughout the day. So you eat some food, you have some sweets, you drink a soft drink, and your blood glucose level shoots through the roof. So we can detect that because we'll find that people have a particular set of symptoms. So we can see them kind of summarized down here, particularly thirst and urination can be one, but it can cause all kinds of problems, really dangerous type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes means that you're insulin dependent, and so what that means is that you need to inject insulin into your body to control your blood glucose level. So you have to test your blood regularly, and after you've eaten, you need to make sure you take some insulin injections in order to reduce your blood glucose level. Type 2 diabetes is about an acquired diabetes. So this is normally when you're obese or when you have far too much sugar in your diet. And what it means is that your body cells will stop producing insulin, stop responding to insulin, sorry, that's produced by pancreas. So the pancreas is producing enough insulin, it should cause it, but your body cells stop responding to it. And what that means is that again, you can't control your blood glucose level, so it goes up, and so we have all of those problems. You don't really inject with insulin here, that you can do, but the big thing is about controlling your diet, so making sure you don't have as many carbohydrates, not consuming as much sugar, and making sure that you exercise a lot. This is an activity which allows you to compare type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So here we've got differences for type 1, here we've got differences for type 2, and then we've got similarities in the middle. Good long answer question, so well worth a look. So features that we'd be looking for. Pancreas doesn't produce enough insulin in type 1. In type 2, of course, they do. It's just that the body cells stop responding to the insulin. In both cases, someone who has diabetes is unable to control their blood glucose levels. Type 1 is treated using insulin injections, whereas type 2 is treated using carbohydrate-controlled diet and exercise. Both of them, however, have these high blood glucose levels, so we identify them through testing. A risk factor for type 2 is about if you are obese and that you're consuming lots of sugar, whereas type 1 is genetic, you inherit it from your mum and dad, so it cannot be prevented. Whereas type 2, of course, can be prevented if you think about what you actually consume. Another classic graph that we have is we have this kind of consuming a drink or consuming a meal and identifying and justifying about which patient has diabetes or which patient doesn't have diabetes. So we can see for patient A, they have a drink at 0 hours. We can see their blood glucose level goes up over that time, whereas for patient B, it goes up to a peak and then it drops down. So that, of course, would say to us that patient A is the diabetic because their blood glucose level doesn't decrease, there's no insulin being produced or their body cells aren't responding to insulin, whereas patient B, insulin gets produced, their body cells respond to it, and so blood glucose levels decrease. The only way these are going to decrease is if patient A, as patient A uses up the glucose.